Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Today I'll be sharing with you all how to make this pretty princess dance bustier dress with puff sleeves and a belt in the middle. Now this style is inspired by shopmora.com as you all can see on the video displayed. So if you are interested in this, stick around and let's get started. So first I started by marking my starting line, and from that starting line I went ahead to mark out all the points of my bodice, which is the chest points, the bust points, the under bust points, the waist point and the allowance points. Now I like marking out these points 2 times so that I'll be able to mark out a straight line. So this dress that we're drafting now is going to be joined at the half length, which is why we are stopping at the waist point. So we're going to draft out a skirt later. We're going to cut out the skirt later. So after connecting the lines, I just went ahead to label all the points together, which is the chest, the bust, the under bust, the waist and the allowance. Now after that, I went ahead to draft neck, the neck point, which I did by coming in by 3 inches on the width and 3 inches on the depth. So after marking those points, I connected it with a curved ruler. After that, I went ahead to mark out the shoulder point, which is 8.5 inches, but I marked 9 inches, which is half inch extra for joining allowance. So I also marked that on the chest point and I connected the 2 points together to form a straight line. Now on the midpoint of that line, I came in by half of an inch, and on the chest point, I marked a quarter of my bust measurement plus half inch for sewing allowance, and then I connected all the points together to form my armhole. Now on the shoulder line, I came down by half of an inch and connected it to the neck line to form a shoulder slope. After that, I went ahead to draw the darts. To draw the darts, I came in by half of my nipple to nipple measurements and connected it on all the lines, and then I just connected all the lines together to form a straight line. Now for a princess that bustier, you just have to come in on the midpoint by half an inch. If it is a bustier, just half an inch is fine, and then on the other side you can mark out the remaining part of the dart. Now this same measurement, I also marked it on the other under bust line. Then on the bust point, I came down by half of an inch. I connected the points on my waistline and under bust line. And then from that half of an inch I came down by, I connected it to the under bust line with a curved rule. I also did the same for the other side. But on the other side, we are not going to use the fuller part of the curve. We just need to be a little bit curved. So I connected it like so. Now, on the upper part of the bust line, I would also come up by half of an inch. Now I do this to eliminate any form of pointiness. And then after that, I would go ahead to connect it to the midpoint of my armhole curve, forming a straight line. Now after connecting it to the armhole, I would go ahead and come up and down of that line by half of an inch. Now this is just like taking a dart on this part. So after coming up and down from that point by half of an inch, I'll connect it down to that half an inch we came up by from the bust point. So just a quick one, let me let you all know how I do get the right dart measurement for the waistline. So I get my dart measurement by dividing half of my nipple to nipple measurement by 2. For example, half of our nipple to nipple measurement here is 4 inches. So divided by 2 is 2 inches. So I used half an inch on the middle point and 1.5 inch on the other parts of the bodies. So moving on, after connecting the 2 lines to the armhole, you can realize or you will see that 1 inch is already lost. So I extended the down part of the line by 1 inch and then connected it back to the down part of the armhole. So now this initial armhole line is no more necessary as we have a new line already. So I guess now that is all for the drafting part of the princess darts bustier. So now it's time for us to mark out the measurements. So for the on the chest line, we will mark out the bust measurements, which is 9.5 inches plus half-inch dart and half-inch join allowance, and then 1.5 inch sewing allowance. And I marked it on the chest point and the bust point. So on the waistline, I came in by our waist measurement plus the dart that we took, which is 2 inches dart, plus 1 inch sewing allowance for the dart, plus 1.5 inch sewing allowance for the dress. And after that, I just like connected all the lines together. Now that we're done with marking out all the measurements, it's time to cut out our bodice. But before then, we need to add our shoulder allowance. Now our shoulder allowance is always necessary because if we connect our dress without an allowance, all the measurements we made would reduce by half of an inch. So you will see that the bust measurement would be half an inch lower than the bust, which we don't want. So always remember to add your shoulder allowance. So after adding the shoulder allowance, I went ahead to cut out the pattern, and this is it for the front part. Now for the back, as usual, I went ahead to mark out the starting point, and then from there I went ahead to mark out the chest point, the bust point, the waist point, and half-inch allowance. Now the waist point for the back is 1.5 inch shorter than that of the front because the waist at the back is shorter than the front. So I went ahead to mark these points on a second time, and then I connected it with a straight ruler. So if you all notice, I did not mark an under bust point because the back does not have a bust and the under bust line is not necessary. So after marking all the connecting the lines, I went ahead to mark out 1 inch allowance for the zip. So I marked 1 inch and drew a straight line. And then from that mark 1 inch line, that is where we'll start drafting, marking our measurements. So if you all can notice from the thumbnail, this is going to be a V-neck at the back. So I came in by 3 inches on the top, and then I came down by 6 inches for the length. If you want, you can come down by 1 inch, but this design is a V-neck at the back, which is why I came down by 6 inch and just connected it to form a V neckline. So after connecting the neckline, I came in from the shoulder line by 9 inches and on the chest line by 9 inches, and I connected it to form a straight line. Then I came down by half of an inch and I connected it to the neckline to form the shoulder slope. And then after that, I just found the midpoint of that straight line. I also went ahead to mark out quarter of my bust measurement plus half-inch join allowance, and then I just connected those points together to form my armhole. If you notice at the back, the armhole is different. That is because our back is more broader and wider than the front, so we don't need to come in by half of an inch. After that, it's time to eliminate any zip bulginess, any bulginess of zip. So how do we eliminate zip bulge? I always come in from the waist point by 1 inch, and then I'll just connect it straight up to the chest. But as you all can see, this is going to be a V-neck stopping at 6 inches from the top. So I connected it straight up to the 6 inches. And then I also went ahead to connect the 1-inch zip allowance. Now after drafting this new zip allowance, it's time for us to draft our darts. For the darts, as usual, we'll come in by 4 inches, which is half of our nipple to nipple measurement, on all the lines, and then we'll connect it together. If you notice that your line is not straight, it is totally fine, because our back is not straight. On the waist point is already inside, like it's already slanted. So you don't have to try to make your dart straight. If you make it straight while sewing or when you are done with your dress, you will notice that the dart is slanty, and we do not want that. So always follow the line. Whether it looks slanty while drafting, it doesn't matter. When you wear it on your bodies, it will appear as straight. So for the darts, I came in by half an inch on both sides, and I just connected it straight up to the chest line. After connecting it, it's time for us to draft out our measurements. So from the zip allowance line, as you all can see, I did not start from the zip allowance, but from the main bodice. So from that main bodice, I marked out the bust measurement plus half-inch dart plus 1-inch sewing allowance. I marked that same thing I got on the bust on the chest line. Now on the waistline, I came in by the waist measurement divided by 4 plus 1-inch dart plus 1-inch join allowance and plus 1.5-inch sewing allowance, and then I just connected all the lines together. After connecting it, I went ahead to cut out my drafted pattern. So again, I forgot to add my shoulder allowance. So please don't forget your shoulder allowance, because it would affect your pattern if you forget it. So here I am just adding it back. I came up by half of an inch, came up by from the slope by half an inch as well, and just connected it. So after connecting it, I cut out the excesses. Yeah, and that is it for our pattern drafting. So there's one thing that I want you all to take note of. Our back is shorter than the front. So how do we blend it together? As you all can see, the front looks longer than the back. So for us to blend it together, you just have to come at that edge where the front meets the back, and then make sure that they align. But before aligning them, always make sure to take note of your sewing allowance, because if you just connect directly from the end, once you sew out your sewing allowance, it won't blend, the lines won't blend. So you have to come out by your sewing allowance first before blending it to the back. I hope you understand. So this is me blending it so that it will connect at the same line with where the back stops. And that is it for our princess dart drafting. Now, after drafting, I went ahead to cut out the materials. This is the material for the front, and this is the material for the back. I also went ahead to cut the skirt patterns for the front and the skirt for the back as well. Now we'll start by, as you all can see, I also cut out padding. If you want to see how to cut out a perfect pad, I have a video on that. So first I started by arranging the front piece, and then after arranging it, I'll just go ahead and sew it up together. I would also do the same thing for the lining. So now I've joined the pieces together. You can see how neat it looks, and I've also joined the lining. So I'll just place this aside, and then for the back, I'll go ahead and close the darts, and I'll also close the darts for the lining as well. Now I've closed the darts and I've closed that of the lining. Now it's time for us to join the top to the skirt. So I went ahead to notch the midpoint of the top and the skirt. So placing both midpoints together, I'll just sew it up, sew it down, yeah. And I'll also do the same thing for the lining. So I've joined both the top and the bottom together. Now it's time for us to turn our neckline. Placing both right sides together, I'll go ahead and sew it down. So I've turned the neckline, and to keep the lining in place, I went ahead to push the sewing allowance in the lining place, and then I just sewed it down. After that, placing both right sides together, I went ahead to sew the down part first before I went ahead to sew the sides. And then I left a little bit of allowance on the shoulder part just for turning it all over. Now, for the front part, I also went ahead to notch the midpoint of the top and the midpoint of the skirt. And then placing both notch points together, I'll go ahead and sew it down. I also did the same thing for the lining. And then after doing that, I went ahead to turn the neckline. After turning the neckline, I sewed on the down part first before sewing on both sides. Why do I always sew on the down part? This is because I always cut my lining shorter than the actual material, so that the lining will not show outside of, will not be longer than the material, and so it to actually be in place. I hope you understand. So after turning the front part, I went ahead to come down from the waist point by 8 inches, and then from that, which is 1 inches shorter than my hip allowance, my hip point. Now for that, from that 8 inches, I'll just sew it down to where my slit begins. So I used 1 inch allowance to sew it down to the slit. Now I've sewed it down, and the next thing I went ahead to do was to attach the zip. Now I've attached the zip, and the next thing we're going to do is to attach both shoulders of the front and back together. Now if you want a clean finishing on that shoulder joining region, just use one of the shoulder to wrap the other shoulder and just sew it down. So that's what I've done, and this is the result. You can see how neat it is. I also went ahead to close any opening that I had before. Now after that, I went ahead to attach the sleeve. Now for my puffy sleeve, I use times 2.5 of my bicep or round sleeve measurement. If you want it to be extremely puffy, you can use your round sleeve measurement times 3. And for the down part of the sleeve, I just folded it, leaving half an inch allowance for the attaching of the elastic, and then I sewed it down. And for the measurement of my elastic, I just used 5 inches minus the measurement of my round sleeve. Now this is the belt. This is the material for the belt. I used 5 inches for the width, and the length was actually times 2 of my waist measurement, 2.5 actually. So I folded it down, and after folding it down, I just went ahead to attach it to the waist point. So for the attachment, while attaching, I placed it on top of the waistline and not below, because I do not want the belt to be downwards. And after attaching it, it's time for us to sew the dress together. So before sewing, I'll just like pin down both armhole together, both waistline together, and then I'll be using my tailor's ham just to get the accurate measurement of the bust before joining. Now this is me. Why? To connect the dress together, to get the accurate measurement, I would first of all get the actual full measurement of the entire dress, and then when I get the measurement, I'll just like minus the excesses and mark where my measurement stops. So I did the same thing that I did on the bust on the waistline. On the waist, I came down by 9 inch for the hips, and I marked the actual measurement of the entire material, and then I'll just like mark out the excesses. So this is how I join my dress together. From the hip line, I came down by 9 inches, and whatever I get on the hips, this is the measurements we're using here is our actual measurement divided by 2. So whatever I get on the hips, I'll just minus 2 inches and mark that on the knee line, which is 9, the thigh line, which is 9 inches below the hip line. And whatever I mark on the thigh line, I mark it on the end of the dress. So here I'm just connecting all the dots together. After connecting it, this same measurement that I got, I would also do that for the other side and sew it up. So I'm done sewing, and this is the result, guys. You can see how beautiful the dress is. I hope you enjoyed my video. I hope you found something helpful in my video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. And if you have any question, please comment. Thank you and bye.